Our story begins inside of the building that has become the home of the Imperial Senate after Palpatine's declaration where he became the official Emperor of the galaxy. After decades of political manipulation, Palpatine of Naboo had everything he could have ever wanted. The Jedi were dead, the Separatists were eliminated, the Grand Army of the Republic was under his command, the Senate answered only to him, Anakin Skywalker had become Darth Vader, and now the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, known to be so calm, so serene, thoughtful, was flipping around the Grand Rotunda, desperately trying to save whatever scraps he thought were left of a dying cage. As Sidious clashed lightsabers with Yoda, he simply couldn't hide his laughter. Sidious began throwing the Senate pods at the Grandmaster, mimicking the fall of the Republic with the fall of the Jedi as pod after pod crashed, as Yoda barely jumped away each time. And when Sidious blasted lightning at him, 1,000 years of hidden Sith rejoiced in this victory. But within Yoda, the whole of the Jedi Order, so many generations of Jedi were firing back. The full power of the light side was pushing Sidious away. It was pure light against pure dark. Winner takes all. And as the fight continued, Yoda had to face a jarring reality that he'd been hiding from for so long. The reality that he, the Grand Master of the Order, perhaps the fiercest, most powerful Jedi to ever live, simply did not have the power to win this battle any longer. Yoda realized that the Sith had changed. They've grown. They've adapted over these 1,000 years in preparation for this exact moment. The Sith had remade themselves, while the Jedi had spent the last millennium thinking they'd secured the ultimate victory. Yoda put his hands up to block a new blast of lightning, and he barely held on to his lightsaber, and Yoda came to realize there was no way to kill Darth Sidious and walk out of here alive. So he realized there was only one way out. He accepted death, pulling down his hands, but planting his feet into the Senate pod. Lightning more powerful than anything Sidious had produced before blasted right into Yoda. It coursed through his body, burned him apart, and Yoda gripped his green lightsaber with both of his hands, and then he spun it through the air. As Darth Sidious laughed with glee and with power, ripping Yoda apart with lightning, he looked to where the Grand Master stood, and through the lightning, the small green saber was spinning like a starship through hyperspace. Sidious's eyes went wide as the green saber emerged from the lightning and pierced his heart. The lightning stopped. Yoda dropped to his knees. Sidious did the same, and Yoda told Sidious that, at an end their rule is. And both of them tumbled out of the pod, dying together. And while Sidious's body clattered around like a ragdoll, Yoda's body disappeared as he did what no Sith ever could by living even after complete death. Clone troopers would soon enter the Senate building to find the body of their emperor killed by the blade of Yoda. And far away in the galaxy, Obi-Wan Kenobi stood atop a lava riverbank, looking down at his fallen student. Anakin's eyes were burning with rage as he looked up at Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan nearly begged Anakin not to do it. He already knew what would happen if Anakin tried to make this jump. Obi-Wan knew that he would have to do it, but even so, he held reverence or compassion for the man Anakin once was, the man Anakin was meant to become. For years, Obi-Wan had let his attachment to Anakin cloud his views. He'd argued for Anakin, made excuses for him, covered for him again and again, and all the while, he denied himself of the truth. He didn't do nearly enough to stop Anakin from following this path. But of course, Anakin's need to prove himself would win out in this moment, and he would attempt to flip over Obi-Wan. So Obi-Wan did what the Jedi are supposed to do. He let go of his attachment, and he swung his blade through the air. Anakin tumbled to the hot ground, slipping down towards the lava without legs, and without his one good arm. All that was left was his mechanical arm, and Obi-Wan had to turn away as the flames consumed his robes, his body, and Anakin became a charred mess. It was a horrific sight, and Obi-Wan considered going down to finish this, but the loose soil, along with the fact that Padme was running out of time, told Obi-Wan to turn away. He could not kill this helpless man. He would leave it up to the Force, and as Obi-Wan ran back to his ship, the Force answered him. He felt a familiar presence, and before running up the ramp, he looked across the landing pad to see the blue ghost of Yoda himself. Obi-Wan had no words, but Yoda just said he did what he had to do. Sidious is dead, and so is he. But Yoda told Obi-Wan that he must go back, save what is left of Skywalker. His children soon may be born, and if they someday learn that Obi-Wan killed their father, they may choose the dark side of the Force like their father before them. Obi-Wan closed his eyes in pain and confusion. He said there's no way Anakin can be transported alive after what has become of him. And Yoda just said that Obi-Wan always finds a way, and he faded back into the Force. For a fleeting moment, Obi-Wan thought he saw Qui-Gon as well, and his peaceful presence in the Force was soothing, but Obi-Wan rubbed his eyes, and it was gone. He quickly ran into the Naboo ship, finding Padme on one of the resting beds. She was alive, and Obi-Wan moved through the ship's medical storage area until he found exactly what he needed, a medical capsule just large enough to transport Anakin, especially since he no longer had any legs. Obi-Wan would go as fast as he could back down to the lava riverbank, and the entire time, he wondered if Yoda was right. Was Anakin surviving necessary for the Skywalker children? Obi-Wan also had to ask himself if he actually just saw a ghost of Yoda. Everything right now was so confusing, but he would indeed bring the capsule down to Anakin, who was barely conscious, and he would be loaded onto it. And soon, the void outside the cockpit of Padme's ship felt colder than ever to Obi-Wan as he guided the ship into hyperspace, the hum of the engines doing little to drown out the faint, tortured groans echoing from the capsule behind him. Anakin, his former brother, his closest friend, was no longer the bright, powerful Jedi he'd raised beside him. What remained was a shattered, limbless husk, barely breathing, intermittently writhing in agony. Obi-Wan tried to block it out, to retreat into meditations of the Jedi, but it was impossible. Every breath Anakin took felt like a tremor in Obi-Wan's soul. The stench of the flesh lingered, the screams echoed, and over it all, Yoda's final warning pressed into his thoughts like a weight. If Anakin dies, his children may never forgive Kenobi or the Jedi. And when the ship finally touched down on Polis Massa, Obi-Wan was hollowed out by grief and guilt, stumbling through the sterile white corridors with two burdens. One still fighting for life, the other preparing to give new life. The medical droids would move quickly, splitting them into two wings of the facility. Padme was weakened from the trials of Mustafar, but she was holding on. And in another chamber, Anakin was submerged in a sealed stasis tank as medical personnel stabilized his vitals, cauterized any exposed nerves, and attached life support to preserve what they could of this ruined body. They couldn't save his limbs, they couldn't undo the flames of Mustafar, but they could try and restore some of his breathing, some form of life. Obi-Wan watched from behind the glass, not as a Jedi or a general, but as a man who was convinced that he'd failed everyone who depended on him. Hours would pass by in a fog. Obi-Wan sat alone between the two wings of the station after helping deliver the babies with Padme. He was unsure which door he feared entering more. And then the alert came in from Bail Organa. Padme was awake. She'd survived the delivery. Twins, a boy and a girl. It was a spark of hope in the chaos of everything going on, and Padme clung to that hope and to the knowledge that Anakin was still alive, even if his body had become something else entirely. She didn't know what had become of Anakin, but Obi-Wan told her that he was still alive, and that was enough. She knew there was good in him. It kept her alive when her will had nearly broken, and when she was finally strong enough to be moved, she asked to see him. Obi-Wan didn't know what to say. He couldn't say no, so he said he would take her. Obi-Wan helped Padme into a floating chair, guiding it across the hallways. Obi-Wan also wasn't sure what to expect, and as they entered, Padme looked across the recovery chamber into the containment field where Anakin was laying. The suit Anakin Skywalker was now encased in was born not from Sith devices or Imperial design, but from necessity. It was salvaged from advanced medtech, kept on Polis Massa for emergency trauma among deep space researchers and doctors. It was sleeker and less oppressive than the black armor he would have worn had Sidious lived, and it was designed to sustain rather than to enslave Anakin. This exoskeleton was formed from a lightweight durasteel alloy bonded to synthetic interface nodes, allowing for smooth, adaptive movement through neural feedback relays. His new limbs were dexterous, durable, more functional than monstrous, and across his chest and his back, overlapping plates of armor flexed with his breath, shielding a pressurized internal suit lined with cooling gel tubes, organ monitoring implants. His respirator was smaller, integrated into a high-collar chest seal, while a chromed facial mask restored vision, sound, and some semblance of identity. A visor extended from the bridge of his nose to his temples, relaying readouts to his brain through subtle pulses. The mask's voice retained the cadence of his natural voice, albeit roughened by the cauterized vocal cords. It wasn't beautiful, but it wasn't horrible either. It was a fusion of survival and dignity, an echo of the Jedi he once was, with the scars of what he'd become. Obi-Wan was afraid. He wondered if Anakin would wake up and find a way to rip this building apart, to get revenge on Kenobi for doing this to him, but Padme held no fear. She knew why Anakin did all of this. He was convinced she was going to die in childbirth, and the manipulations of Darth Sidious consumed him until this was all that remained. She was right. Anakin's return to consciousness would come not as a sudden jolt, but as a tide of painful sensations. Everything felt cold and wrong. He couldn't feel his fingers, because he had none. His breath came in with a soft mechanical hum, not through lungs but through filters, tight against his face. The faint hum of the servos whispered with every single small movement. There was no pain anymore, at least not physical pain. It was numbed, or he just simply didn't have the nerves to feel it. There was just a constant pressure, like his body was no longer his own. He tried moving, and parts of him responded, but not the way he remembered. It was as though he'd been rebuilt from shattered glass, pieced together with unfamiliar parts. And he saw her, Padme, alive, with a child in each arm, and for a moment the world seemed to stop, not from peace, but from the collapse of everything Anakin thought to be true. She'd lived. the children were real, and every betrayal, every death, every dark retreat had been for nothing, Anakin realized. There'd never been a need for violence, for his fire, for his rage. It was all built on lies, from his fear twisted by Sidious, sealed by his own hatred. A tidal wave of guilt hit him so hard, and he tried to meet Obi-Wan's gaze, but the Jedi Master stood at the edge of the room, back turned, as he was completely silent and unreachable. Anakin wanted to speak, to collapse under the weight of what he'd done, but the suit barely even let him fall. It was holding him up, even as the truth dragged him to his knees within. He didn't deserve this mercy. Not Padme, the children, not the life still ticking inside of him, and yet they'd saved him anyway. Time from here would go on, even without Palpatine. The political structure of the galaxy had shifted. The dead body of the Emperor was discovered with a lightsaber wound, further cementing that the Jedi were treasonous traitors that needed to be killed off once and for all. The politicians close to Palpatine, such as Mas Amedda, Sly Moore, and others in his circle, would act quickly, as Mas Amedda would become the Emperor for now. And from Polis Massa, Padme would return to Naboo for a bit of time with the children. Her parents would help to raise them, but Padme knew she had to return to the Senate. She felt responsible for what happened, because Anakin did what he did for her. So after a month, Padme would return, and Obi-Wan Kenobi would go into exile as one of the most recognizable Jedi in the galaxy. He had no choice. He would travel to Jeddah, live amongst the ruins of an ancient temple. Anakin would remain on Polis Massa, as further testing was done to ensure he can live like this. He was kept secretly in a cell behind a ray shield door, and it would be a long time before he was allowed to leave. Padme accepted this, unsure if she could ever get close to him again. And in the Senate, Padme stood in her Senate pod as she denounced the corruption, exposed Palpatine's Sith identity, and swore to the galaxy that the Empire's foundation was forged in lies. Her words were met with silence. The chambers that once held debate were filled with quiet obedience as people were fearful of this empire. She saw soon that if the opportunity for change in the Senate was lost, then the only way forward was to rise outside of it. Bail Organa would promise to hold ground within the system, buying her time and information, while Mon Mothma and Ryo Chuchi helped to identify sympathetic senators and systems to Padme's new cause. And Ryo would give Padme an idea. She reached out through encrypted channels, seeking the one clone trooper she trusted more than any other, Captain Rex. It took weeks. He was deep in hiding, chip removed, living in the gray areas of the galaxy with a small band of clone defectors. When she found him, he was ready and willing to fight back, and the two of them were the perfect voices to rally other clone troopers behind this cause. One by one, the clone rebellion would begin to take shape. In secret, Padme recorded a message for the clones. The Jedi were gone. Their inhibitor chips were losing their control. She didn't ask them to remember all of this. She asked them to remember their brothers, remember the Jedi when they fought beside them, not above them. And then she asked the question no one else ever had. What do you want your legacy to be? Fighting for an empire that is throwing them away like droids, or trying to restore a republic that will fight for them as well? That message was passed between barracks, played in quiet corners of the Outer Rim, watched through eyes by soldiers who'd never been given this choice, and for the first time since the war ended, they would begin to make one. The first true act of rebellion came on Onderon. A small detachment of clones, led by Commander Cody, refused an order to fire on civilians protesting Imperial occupation. When reinforcements arrived, the clones turned their weapons on the stormtroopers who were trying to replace them. News of this standoff spread quickly. Padme transmitted a second message across the HoloNet, this time under no pretense of legality. She declared the Empire illegitimate. She had names: Amida, Moore, Tarkin, the senators who handed the galaxy to fear, and she called on all beings, clone or not, to resist. That message would help to light a fuse, and without Anakin or Obi-Wan to lead them, the rebellion would grow from the ground up. Padme and Rex were at the center. She helped to coordinate allies from her hidden base on Naboo's moons, while Rex traveled between cells, retaining clones to operate as insurgents rather than soldiers. Bail Organa worked the Senate from within, buying time before the Empire closed its grip completely, and as the Empire accelerated production of stormtroopers and cracked down on resistance worlds, clone-led raids disrupted key supply chains. Former Jedi, with Ahsoka among them, quietly would join in. They helped Padme and Rex to build this movement, and by the end of the second year, the galaxy was fracturing. The Empire still held the core, but the Outer Rim was bleeding away. Dozens of systems had declared independence with the help of the clones. Padme's speeches were now translated into 100 languages. The Senate moved to quiet Organa and those who aligned with him, but they were too full of themselves to realize the clone resistance had already grown far too much to stop now. They were too late. Before long, the quiet arrival of dozens of Venators now returned to Coruscant with purpose. Inside the lead cruiser, Padme stood at the helm beside Captain Rex, wrapped in his battle-worn armor, repainted with some blue and some gold, symbols of both resistance and remembrance. Padme had her own armor, created to honor Naboo. They'd come to reclaim the galaxy, and in the shadows of the Imperial Senate Dome, Mas Amedda watched the skies in disbelief as the clone fleets jammed planetary communications and power grids. The Empire had grown lazy behind its curtain of fear, while the clones had only grown more powerful. And the battle for Coruscant would surge quickly. Clones turned on their stormtrooper replacements. Streets were filled with people waving Republic banners, emboldened by the sudden shift in power. Key communication hubs, transport stations were taken within the first day, and by nightfall, Padme stood before the Senate once again as the face of the galaxy's resistance. She declared the Empire was over. Clones held the chamber's entrances. Stormtroopers who resisted were subdued with ease. Amedda was captured trying to flee. The fighting would go on for many months, Republic versus Empire, but for the first time in years, it was the Empire that was on the run. As the fighting slowed and democracy returned, the people of Coruscant would find Padme standing amongst them all. The fight to push out the Empire was over, not because of one lightsaber, one Jedi, but because enough people chose to stand up behind the clones that fought for them. The Jedi would someday return, slowly, quietly, but it would not come all at once, not yet. The Senate would be rebuilt to listen, and the clones were all given a choice: settle wherever they wish, live free, and be remembered as soldiers in a rebellion that restored peace. Padme would not choose to become the leader of this restored republic. She had a new life to live now that she did everything she could. Instead, it would be Ryo Chuchi who became the new chancellor. In the years following the fall of the Empire, systems were given autonomy. Clone veterans honored and supported, not forgotten. Padme remained a guiding presence among the people, raising her children in the light. Luke and Leia grew quickly, and though they did not yet understand why, they were watched from afar by two quiet guardians. Obi-Wan Kenobi remaining in exile, having chosen the sacred ruins of Jeddah as his place of solitude. And in the beginning, he did keep his distance from the galaxy's rebuilding, believing others were better suited to heal what he thought he broke. But in time, his presence on Jeddah was a quiet legend. He was helping people here and on nearby systems however he could. Anakin Skywalker lived in the shadows of his past, never more than a few systems away from his family, but never close enough to actually be with them. He couldn't. He watched his children grow through holo messages, listened to Leia's laughter from hidden balconies, followed Luke's training sessions through the Force. He could not be Anakin Skywalker any longer. That man died with the many Jedi that he killed, but his children could become what he failed to be. Ahsoka Tano stayed at Padme's side, taking on the role of teacher as she trained Luke and Leia slowly, letting the Force find them naturally. And many, many years later, Naboo had become a quiet center of balance in the galaxy. Chancellor Chuchi's republic flourished with transparency and diversity. Leia Organa at 20 was already a voice of fire and reason in the Senate. Luke was more reserved but deeply intuitive, and had begun traveling with Ahsoka to ancient temples across the galaxy, learning the stories long buried. Obi-Wan brought Anakin to Jeddah, and although the two of them could never bring back what they once had, Anakin had found the light once more, as his children were hopeful beacons for a saved galaxy. And folks, that is our story for today. One that it's an interesting path, because in these stories where Anakin is saved on Mustafar, I never know what direction fully I want to take. It's hard to balance a happy story with what should happen, because the guy's a mass murderer at the time. Doesn't really deserve or get a happy life after everything that he did, but it's fun to explore nonetheless, and it is fun. I don't know, creating a new sort of suit for him that isn't Vader's is very difficult. I took inspiration from Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. It's one of the novels. It's just really good. Kind of just dives into Vader's suit. Just kind of tried to build off that and explore from there. Just make it less painful, I guess. Yeah, hard to do because, he's a burned corpse essentially, but we tried, we did our best. So appreciate you guys. Hope you enjoyed the story. Hope you didn't mind that it kind of just it was the title's got Yoda and Palpatine, but it kind of becomes a Padme story in a way, which I think is fun. She's a character I really like. So yeah, that's about all I got for you. Let me know what you want to see next. Hit the subscribe button. We're pushing to that 100K mark, which is unbelievable. I mean, it's insane. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.